4, 3, 2, 1. Walk with me through the cellar door.
The storm is coming, Francis.
A portal to a more skeptical world.
Cellar Door Skeptics begins right now. Prepare for the revolution with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna.
Welcome to Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you so much for joining us for episode 43 on this wonderful Tuesday night. And we have an amazing episode in store. And look, Hannah, I've already started saying amazing, so you can blow it out your ass. Oh, maybe I shouldn't swear. You can already blow it out your butt to begin with tonight, because I'm going to create an amazing show, and you get to become the accomplice that joins me. But tonight, in all seriousness, we do have a wonderful show planned for you. We actually have an interview lined up that we're going to get to in just a second with Democratic runner Dennis Murphy. And this is amazing because he's a local hometown boy. He's from Muskegon, lives in Grand Rapids, and he has a lot of great information that will help you decide that the Democratic Party is a lot better to vote for than voting for a third party. And yes, we're going to get into it again, and Hannah and I may disagree a little bit, but even after last episode, we talked about the privilege side of it. We're going to get into also talking about Cain and who the heck he married. Because how does the son of Adam and Eve marry somebody from
somewhere else?
And then we're going to end with talking about the TPP. And we'll probably get a little bit into that with Dennis because that's on his website. But we will go into a deeper dive to kind of get into what specifically TPP is and whether it's a terrible or whether it'll be a great prediction. So I know Hannah loves it because he's a Trump lover, and this is just like his favorite thing here. But without further ado, I don't want to hold up the interview. And Hannah, since you're the one that acquired the guest tonight and you brought all of the information, I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce our wonderful guest.
I was trying to find the people that were going to be on the ballot for the August 2nd vote that we just had, and I'm just going through the list trying to see who's going to be running, and there was only one person running for the congressional district that I got to vote in, and so, one Democrat. I don't count the Republican as an existing person very often, but Dennis was on there. I sent him a message on his Facebook, just like, hey, I'm in the non-believer community. I've got a couple questions, what kind of things and that are you going to be supporting? So he responded, and we talked a little bit, and it just came through where he said he'd be willing to come on, Cellar Door Skeptics. So Dennis Murphy is he's running for, it's the 2nd district for Michigan, and he's basically on his own from a grassroots setup here. And he's in and out of Grand Rapids, but I'm guessing he's based in Muskegon because he got like almost 70% of the vote out there. It was a really, really cool turnaround. So, Dennis, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So I'll take the lead, I guess, Hannah, since you don't want to. So thank you so much, sir, for joining us. And it's amazing because, when we get a live guest, somebody we can actually talk to and ask the questions and the important questions, I think it's very relative, right? Because what's the big thing that people see? Campaign ads. What do I hate more than anything else? Campaign ads. I cannot stand them.
They work, unfortunately. Yeah.
And you're right, they do. And that's a really sad part about it is without actually talking to the candidates, and there's hundreds and hundreds of candidates, so it would be almost impossible if we interviewed everybody. But in my opinion, there should almost be a platform set up to do some of that, because if we could get to know you better, you could get to know your constituents better, you're going to make better decisions when you get elected, and you're also going to be able to bring some of your opinions, and you'll be able to sway people like maybe Chris Hanna, who does float on that independent side a little bit more than I do.
Well, to be blunt, I never registered as a Democrat until January.
Oh.
To do this, I mean, I'll tell you a little bit of how I got into this, because I've always kind of voted independent. In the past, I have voted across the aisle Republican. I consider myself a progressive liberal, but I'm a pragmatist. So who's going to do the job best? for 10 years, we were in Vern Ayler's district, in the 3rd district over here in Grand Rapids, and I voted for him every time. The guy was brilliant. He was a physicist. He knew science, right? So, unfortunately, to be honest, I think the Republican Party has become the anti-science party. And my background, as a skeptical thinker and in engineering and in manufacturing the last 20 years, it's like we need facts and we need science to guide our decisions. And yeah, there's other things that go into it. There's morality and whatnot. But let's not let ideology direct us away from actual facts and actual science.
Amen. And you don't hear that on this show very often, but amen to that.
Yeah, so talking to your numbers just real quickly, yeah, Muskegon was a good turnout. My wife and I are originally from Muskegon. She's from Fruitport. I went to Muskegon High School. So that is a big base for us. Muskegon's a strong Democratic county. And what happened was in December, I saw a Facebook page from my opponent, and it was some totally non-factual stuff. And I went to the Democratic Congressional page, and I said, hey, is anybody running against this guy? Because I had met Dean Vanderstelt 2 years ago. He was a good candidate, and obviously he didn't win. And I didn't hear anything. I said, well, if nobody else is running against him, I'll run against him. And they called me.
Oh, wow.
And my wife was like, what did you get us into? So we went to a meeting in December with the Democratic Party from that congressional district, and they said, okay, well, let's see if anybody else, let's wait a month. Let's wait till January 12th. If nobody else throws their hat in the ring, then we'll go with you. I'm like, okay. January 12th rolled around. Nobody else stepped forward. So they basically said, well, you're the candidate then. So basically we're learning from the ground up what it takes to, whether from the point of just getting the right forms to get your petition signed, to what PACs to contact, to how do you raise money. I mean, we've been learning it's been a huge learning curve. I mean, because we've never done this before, and we haven't run for office before, but my wife's been a big helper, and it's been a struggle, but it's been instructive and frustrating all at the same time.
So that's kind of good backstory, why you chose to go in and why you chose to run. What made you choose to pick the Democratic side versus running a third party?
Well,
or Republican, I guess.
Again, I'm a big fan of history. A big fan of history. Anybody asks me, they tell you I should have been a history teacher, because I actually started out as a music teacher. But the history of third parties is that they always siphon votes away from major parties. Their strongest issues always get absorbed by one party or the other. The only exception was the Republican Party in the late 1850s up to 1860, because slavery was such a hot issue. I mean, we're not just talking a hot button issue like abortion or gun control. We're talking a searing hot, tear the country apart issue that basically the Whigs tried to have it both ways, and they just the thunder rolled over them, and they went defunct. They went out of business, and the Republican Party was left standing with what was actually the Andrew Jackson Democratic Party, and so that is the only time a third party got into an election and actually sustained itself as a major party going forward. Teddy Roosevelt, Bull Moose, basically he ran as a third party in the early 1900s and cost the election of his former friend President Taft to the then incoming Woodrow Wilson. Nader cost Gore the election. Ross Perot cost H.W. Bush the election to Clinton. I mean, it's a mathematical fact. And so I think what happens is, not that I don't think we shouldn't have more parties, but under the current structure, it's not possible. What you might want to do is look at electing progressive to Congress and 2 state houses that could initiate laws that might facilitate third parties.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point. If the system can't change, we are entrenched in a 2-party system. It is what it is. And
you have to have people in office willing to tweak to work at that entrenchment and maybe whittle away at it. For example, one of the ideas I have, and I know that some people don't think it's a good idea, but let's say for congressional seats and Senate seats and the president, I don't think that they should be running out there collecting money and pulling money from PACs. I think the federal government should fund third parties, candidates, with a federal amount of dollars and just to toss out a dollar amount for conversation, let's say $1 per constituent. So I'm running for Congress. There's 144,000 people in my district. I would get $144,000 from the federal government, and so would my opponents. There might be a libertarian candidate on the ballot. They would get the same. The three of us would each get $144,000. That's all we can spend. Can't spend any more.
That's the old public funding model. That's great.
Right, but we'd all be on an equal level playing field to get our message out. So that, I mean, the Supreme Court has ruled that money is speech. The problem is that too much money becomes shouting speech, and you shout down the other side.
So is that part of your election reform? So on your website, you have a portion where you talk about election reform. I
do. It's a minor part. I do think more important than that, we need federal standards for elections, so that states can't manipulate voter ID, where they put polling places, what machines they use. I am a big opponent of touchscreen voting machines. Those things are the worst, and they've already been shown to be hackable. Mm-hmm. And all it takes is a few of those voting machines in the wrong precincts, in the wrong state like Ohio and Florida, and you can literally swing the election under the electoral college model from one president to the other, one presidential candidate to the other.
Ugh.
Yeah. There's been a couple mathematicians that have actually come through with certain things. I think it was Wisconsin. There was a mathematician that said that there was statistically impossible for the outcome on a couple of votes, and they've been trying to get these reforms, trying to get the information, trying to get the security measures that are used for a lot of these voting machines. Obviously, I don't know how safe and how structured. Even in Michigan, when we get the paper ballot, you just feed it in there. I have no way to confirm that. If I can go online and check my vote, maybe they would have, you'd log in, have your own personal ID, anything like that, just so that we can maintain and keep an eye on what's going on.
Good idea. Now that would be one way to do it. So, for example, every time you get a ballot, when you walk in, first of all, you're absolutely right. Paper ballot has to be the start of everything. You can't just do touchscreen and get a piece of paper that prints out what you did, because that doesn't reflective of what the machine actually tallies. You and I are all computer savvy enough to know that what comes out on a piece of paper isn't necessarily what the computer records and saves later, right?
Yeah.
Right? So we absolutely need the paper, so that if there's a dispute, you open up the machine and somebody can literally go through each piece of paper and actually do a count. But I think your idea, that's the first I've heard of it, and I think I'm going to roll that into my thinking, is so you get a ballot, and your ballot is number 5012. Why can't you go online later with a pen and look at the ballot results for 5012 and see what your vote is?
Yeah.
I mean, this stuff is not technologically impossible.
No, it's a database. It's an easy database.
Exactly.
That, I mean, for Christ's sake, I work at Steelcase, and we have databases that run our SAP systems. It would be no different.
Exactly. Yeah. So I really think our biggest threat to democracy is not what the Republicans want to call voter fraud, but is, to be precise, voter impersonation, where you go in and pretend you're somebody else, or you pretend you're an eligible voter and you're not, and you vote. To actually steal an election with that is so logistically impossible, right? But to steal an election by hacking some computer chips on the right voting machines, that's where fraud's going to occur.
I definitely agree.
Yeah, and so one of the things when we talk about voter election fraud, right, is it came up that the Clinton party and the DNC aggressively went after Bernie, and we have to talk about this, and
Please,
because I think it's important, because some of me feels it's played up. Some of me also feels that the DNC, just like the RNC, they have the ability to put who they want, right? And obviously Bernie was not who they wanted. I disagree with that. I would be more happy with Bernie as a candidate, but with the two-party system, that's just the way it is. And so, like you said, hey, what do we got to do to change that? Well, we need to get third parties in local elections. The federal government should be stepping up and saying, okay, hold on, you know what? We're impartial to Democrats and Republicans. We should have these. Like, I'm 100% for actually seeing Jill Stein and Gary Johnson on the debate stage, right?
I am too. I don't have a problem having them on the debate stage. I wouldn't vote for either one for different reasons. Even though some of my views might lean more towards Jill Stein than the Libertarians, but
Yeah.
I think this would be the year to have all four up there if we're going to have them up there.
Yeah.
But,
go ahead.
Let me go back onto the DNC thing. So, first of all, I don't think it's any secret that the DNC favored Clinton since Bernie actually never registered as a Democrat until January.
Mm-hmm.
So they're establishment Democrat. She's an establishment Democrat. Is it a secret that they favored her? Absolutely not. Now, whether or not they quote unquote stole the election, I disagree. If you look at the results of the votes in the various states during the primaries and the caucuses, Bernie actually did better in the caucuses by like a 2-1 or 3-1 margin. Hillary basically crushed him in places where you actually had a primary vote, where you actually had to go in and vote on a ballot. I don't know, have you ever been to a caucus? Do you know what they're like?
I personally have not, no.
I have friends that are in
caucus
Iowa, and they said
Yeah.
it's a circus.
It's a circus. So basically, everybody goes to a gym or a hall, and you got the Hillary people on one side with their sign, and the Bernie people on the other, the chair people, and they're basically calling out, and then people just basically divide in the room and go to the side of the room they want to go to, and you're doing this public. It's not like it's a secret ballot where you fill in the bubble and you run it through the machine. So there's a lot of peer pressure. There's a lot of neighborly pressure going on, right? So it's not an actual vote. So caucuses are quite different than elections or primary elections. But Hillary did much better. She won by 500,000 votes. But yes, now, first of all, to go back to the DNC, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, incompetent.
Oh, yeah.
She should have never been in charge of that group. She is not a good administrator, and she obviously let her bias show. But when you look at the emails that they supposedly got tweeted or hacked out by WikiLeaks or Julian Assange, what it tells me is that the DNC staff is incompetent. They couldn't have pulled off conspiracy if they wanted to. So did the DNC lean to Hillary? Yes. Did they do enough to throw the election to her? No, they were incompetent enough to not be able to do that. So
I'm gonna guess you're not a 9/11 truther, because the same feel here.
No, I'm a pragmatist. I try to look at the facts, and these people just couldn't do their job. If they wanted, it was worse than G. Gordon Liddy trying to break into Watergate. I mean, come on, at least he got in the building, right?
So let's move on to a little bit of local politics here,
Sure.
just for a second. And in the pre-show, if you want to call it that, we talked a little bit about marijuana reform. And I think that's a topic that our show has touched on. I volunteered with Decriminalized GR. I went door to door collecting signatures back. I don't know, that's got to have been 4 years. I think it's been 4 years now, something like that. Anyway, so I went door to door. I ran the statistics. I worked as closely as I could to try and make that a reality. And not as much because I wanted people to be able to smoke pot. It's because there was institutionalized racism that was happening in GR specifically.
Oh, absolutely.
And so what I want to do is this year on the ballot, as any of our listeners know, marijuana is up for legalization. They have 2 or 3 proposals just for the state of Michigan. And I think what would be important is with your campaign is, where do you stand on that? Your site doesn't have it, probably for specific reasons, but you don't have a specific position posted. So what type of marijuana reform are you looking for, or do you support?
Well, so here's my view. The drug war is a failed drug war. All it's done is feed Eisenhower talked about the military-industrial complex. What we have also in this country right now is a law enforcement to prison to incarceration complex, and it's a whole cycle of drug arrest and incarceration and imprisonment, and it's just a cycle. They can break into your house, they can take all your possessions, and then you have to fight to get it back if you're innocent. I mean, it hasn't worked. Now, there's some drugs that are probably need to be kept on the list. From a federal standpoint, first of all, let's back up. So from a state standpoint, you guys are pushing this legislation. And as we talked in the pre-show, I'm a cyclist. I do a lot of running. I do some athletic events. This is not something that appeals to me as a recreational activity or even a medicinal activity, but I don't consider it any more harmful than alcohol. In fact, maybe in some manner or means it's less harmful. So I don't have a problem with it being legalized. The problem is that when you go out to Oregon, go out to Colorado, they're doing these laboratories of democracy experiments, and they're being quite successful, except that marijuana is still on the federal Class 1 list, right up there with heroin and cocaine. So the only thing that's been a forbearance for those movements in those states has been the fact that the current administration has just basically said, hands off, we're not going to do anything. Now, you elect a law and order candidate, and all of a sudden he might have the feds crashing through Oregon, crashing through Colorado, crashing through Michigan, and amping up the pressure on what the states considered legal, but the federal government still doesn't. My position is that marijuana should be legal internally in the U.S., but illegal to import. And that is for a specific reason. My understanding is that the drug cartels get about 60% of their revenue from marijuana.
Yeah.
So if you're an internal U.S. citizen and we make it legal and your state makes it legal, whether just for medicinal purpose or even just generally like they want to tax and run it like alcohol at the state level, then if you're a person that wants to get involved in that as a business venture, would you rather deal with trying to get stuff that's snuck across the border and get smacked, or would you just go to your local grower, maybe a guy out in Zealand will have a greenhouse growing the stuff for you? And then now we're spurring local business. We're spurring like craft breweries, only it's going to be craft marijuana, so to speak, right? All right. So that's the way I look at it. Let's hit the drug cartels where we can hit them the hardest, 60% of the revenue, while spurring local businesses in the U.S. at the state level. Let the state level take over and do tax and regulate it like they do alcohol.
That sounds amazing.
That can't happen until the federal government takes it off the Class 1 list.
Definitely. That's where I've basically been arguing myself, and Chris obviously definitely agrees. He's probably released a few more of them than I would, but I like the Scandinavian model where they do a lot of that kind of stuff, where they really keep some things as like mental health, where they help people who have issues as opposed to criminalizing it, and then you take the lower ones off and just make it a little bit more personal choice.
The other key aspect is that a lot of these marijuana facilities in Oregon, Colorado, and around the country they've been legalized statewide, they don't have access to the national banking system because marijuana is still on the Class 1 list. So until they remove that, these places are keeping like hundreds of thousands of dollars in safes in their basement. You know, it's like they're at risk of criminal violence because they can't access the banking system. So my view, take it off the list. It's a failed law. Let's still keep it illegal to import. Let's spur local businesses and let states manage it the way the states want to.
Yeah. And see, and I'll be honest, I'm a little bit more libertarian in that aspect. I do think it should be taxed, and I think the tax is a portion of that should go for mental health resources, and not just because I don't think marijuana users are going to check into mental health wards.
No,
but
much.
That's all good. They may not do that. Like I say, the state, nothing in the alcohol taxes in Michigan go to mental health. So
no,
that's something you'd have to take up with your state legislators.
Yep.
But to get that ball rolling, you need to get it off the Class 1 list at the federal level.
And I agree. And hopefully, when you go there, you can help push that agenda. Because for me, the big thing is I would legalize all sorts of drugs personally, and I would tax the crap out of them. And I would do the same thing. I would crack down on the borders in terms of bringing drugs in. If we're going to manufacture heroin, let's just do it at home here. Why the hell do we got to import it, right?
I agree. Yeah, I'm not quite that libertarian, but I think that my biggest problem is that we've got a cycle of incarceration. It's damaging people's rights. It's eliminating their ability to get good jobs. I'd like to see more and more states, even federally, I'd push a ban the box, if you've heard of that term, ban the box legislation. I mean, you shouldn't have to check the box that you have a criminal background unless the violation of which you've been convicted is relevant to the job that you're going for. Yep. I mean, you have to check it, that you did embezzlement if you're trying to get a job in a bank. But if you're getting a job as a groundskeeper, at a cemetery where all you're doing is mowing the grass, that should be irrelevant to that job. I'm just an example.
Exactly.
Or it could at least just support people who are trying to start over. So we have a series of barriers, and obviously the incarceration cycle that you were mentioning is something that it specifically isolates a very small, or not so much a very small, but a very specific ethnicity and group of people and poverty levels and those things. So this would be hitting, minorities. This would be hitting impoverished people, the people that are very specifically targeted for a lot of these laws. This is all great news, and I would love to have this voice of reason in Congress. So
thank you.
We're definitely looking forward to the vote in November. And the next place that I wanted to go with this one, because one of the questions that I had asked you on Facebook was just, I'm part of the non-believer community in Grand Rapids. We Chris and I both are. We don't have a lot of representation when it comes to our voice in government at all. And we very strongly support the separation of church and state. And we think this is something that, people talk about, but it doesn't really seem like much is ever happening. We see churches pushing the boundaries, and we see religious organizations throwing money around when it comes to groups like the Liberty University, I think it is. Those, right. I mean, those guys are
Prager
really big
University.
Economic movers, and we want the IRS to check, fill out your Form 990, tell us where your money goes, stuff like that. Right. So I guess where would you go, or what kind of things would you support, if any kind of reform there?
Well, I think the first thing, if I got elected, I would swear in with my hand on a copy of the Constitution.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, that is the law of the land. That is the highest law of the land. And I think that is what we should be swearing our oath of office to. So I think that would be my first activity, getting sworn in, to put my hand on a copy of the Constitution and swear my oath of office to the Constitution. So, and yeah, I do think that there is a problem with, to me, it strikes me as a little bit pandering when, even President Obama does it, and I won't discount anybody's sincere sense of faith, but when every speech has to end with, God bless America, okay, okay, whatever, I mean, to me that's kind of pandering after a while, and we have a country that's got a long sense of history of belief, but also of irreverence and non-belief, all the way back to Thomas Paine, and the ambiguous belief of Jefferson and Madison and the people who were actually Masons, who wrote the Constitution. And I don't think that diversity is well recognized, especially in times of turmoil. And you all, the three of us, we all have some very mutual friends. And I've been a member of what is now the Center for Inquiry, Michigan. I actually was a member of that group as far back as 1998, when it was first called the Free Thought Association of West Michigan. And there were like 12 people meeting. I think I started going to their gatherings maybe within 6 or 8 months of when they actually formed that group. So I've got a long history with them, and it's a great group of people. And I have my wife and I both go. She's done some volunteer work with some of their committees, and I do think we need to make sure that we keep a separation of church and state. And but one of the things I'm up against, obviously, in the 2nd District is it is a very Republican district, and obviously Ottawa County is a very religious district. And so I anticipate there's going to be questions about this. And my view is, when I go in, like if it's in a town hall or a debate, I'm going to say, my understanding is that there isn't a religious test for office, and I think we need to concentrate on the things that are important to citizens in this district and make sure that we don't let religious laws or religious views become actual laws.
Yeah, and I think
how different is it for us to implement religious laws in this country based on the quote unquote majority religion here than it is to do that in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah,
we can't decry Sharia in Saudi Arabia, which actually is Saudi Arabia, in my opinion, is the root of the terrorism in the world. We can't decry Sharia implemented in Arab countries and then sit there and try to do our own version of religious law here.
that's usually where I take that argument and say, if you are going to allow laws in certain really, really conservative areas, if it would be like a religious law, something against gay marriage and the religious basis is the entire argument against that marriage, then you would also have to allow the laws in the other holy books, in the Buddhist books, in the the Hindu books, but that's the thing that they're running to in Florida with the new invocations, where we had the Satanist groups going up and having these things are great. And when you open that book, that Pandora's box, you're opening it to everyone. Right. And so I would love that idea that you would be, okay, well, we can't because we're going to let everybody in. And that's just a great position to have. Yep. And so I guess, Chris, where do you want to go with for the next thing? Because we got, we talked campaign finance reform. We've got, a little bit of the drug law stuff. Would you like to go through some immigration or some women's rights? I know those are really big topics right now.
Yeah, for me, the big thing is women's rights. I've stood on the side of feminism for a long time. I am aggressively pro-choice. Like, I believe the government should be sponsoring women who become pregnant and should be working on the flip side so that if a woman wants an abortion, she can have one, no problem. But in the end, we should be working to how do we prevent people from getting put in shitty situations is the nicest way I can say it.
You're actually absolutely hitting right on the nail on the head.
So my biggest question is, and this is a very controversial question, is there a specific line that you tote or a line you would draw on abortion? Or do you believe that abortion should be able to happen up until the end of the third trimester?
I believe basically my position is the same as what about 80% of Americans are, that probably where you guys are to an extent, that abortion should be legal and available for women all the way through their pregnancy, depending on issues. Most Americans say pretty much unrestricted first trimester, maybe a little more restriction second, and maybe we should be a little tighter on the third. But so that's kind of where I stand. But my view as a congressional candidate, my opponent obviously has his right to life credentials. He likes to waive them. And I actually had a discussion with a lady when I was collecting signatures. That was her primary issue. And I told her, did you know that 30% of the women that have an abortion already have children?
Wow.
No, I don't know that. I didn't know that. Yeah, you can find these statistics. It's a website called the Guttmacher, Guttmacher, Guttmacher Institute. They basically do abortion statistics, and they don't favor one side or the other. They just do the statistics. 30% of the women that have had abortions already have children. Now, why are they making that choice? Their husband's out of work. They're out of work. The social safety net's terrible. They don't have a decent job. Minimum wage hasn't increased in like 15 years. Middle class wages haven't increased in 20 years. They've been flat. I mean, there's daycare is expensive. All these things that go in the whole life. So rather than my opponent touting his right to life credentials, what I want to say is let's tout life credentials. What are the things that go into having somebody make that decision? First of all, the Supreme Court has already ruled. So a congressman who says he can affect this procedure as a congressman can't do it. You can't do it.
Well, hold on though. I guess I'm going to interrupt. I disagree a little bit. I think they could affect it because I personally think that the decisions to pass laws on the state and local level should be removed from everything. So if we could get to the federal government to step and say, all right, stop making these BS laws, stop doing this. We're going to start providing Planned Parenthood with government-funded money, and we're going to stop local organizations funding this crap. And I think that would stop that. And I think a congressman or somebody like that could help propose some of those bills. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, I don't actually. I think you're right, and that's probably a good approach. I guess I'm approaching it from a standpoint of having to argue with the guy that I'm going to run against when he says, "Oh, I've got I'm touting my pro-life credentials." I'm going to say, "Look, that doesn't mean anything in terms of legislation, in terms of eliminating the procedure. It's already a constitutional right."
Yes.
But you are right. What's happening around the country is states are nibbling at the fringes. They keep fighting it from the fringe level, and then they keep getting overturned. It becomes a constant churn of a battle. it's a hot button issue that the Republicans have continued to use to get funding and votes. So what I want to do is cut the legs out from under him and say, you know what? You can say that this, like for example, one of the things he did, and it was false, and hopefully he won't see this because I want to use it in a debate, is he said that I voted to defund Planned Parenthood, and there's 230 other clinics in Michigan that offer the same service. That's false. That is false. There was actually a study. There's only like 29 Planned Parenthood clinics in Michigan, and 29 other what they call federally qualified health service centers. There's not 200. So what would happen is that if they eliminated the funding to Planned Parenthood, all the people that went to those Planned Parenthood for services that could no longer go there only have 29 other locations to go to, not 200. All those other locations he's talking about, they're probably church-based or religious-based. And so what happens is they don't provide birth control. They don't provide abortion counseling. They don't provide STD services. So they get some money from the federal government, but they don't supply all the services that what's defined, I'm going to put it in quotes, defined as a federally qualified health service center does, which are basically alternatives to Planned Parenthood. So in the state, there's actually only 58 fully qualified centers. 28 or 29 of them are Planned Parenthood, and 28 or 29 of them are federally qualified centers. Those are basically the same. Those other ones that my opponent was talking about, not even close.
And they also, the only thing they do, they don't only relatively small amount of the services that they provide.
Right.
Their community outreach, taking care of these types of things, is much more strong and broad based when it comes to, like what you said, the contraceptives and the help and I mean women's rights and women's reproductive health is the biggest thing here.
I think the problem is that obviously they talk about it as money is fungible. So any money that goes to Planned Parenthood may not directly go to abortion services, but it allows other money they get from other sources to do that. And that's where the fight is. That's why the Republicans keep introducing the legislation they do. They figure if they tighten the strings on Planned Parenthood, then the money that has to come from other sources to, first of all, we can stop sending money to Planned Parenthood from a federal level. They will still be in the business of what they do, all those health services, breast cancer screenings, etc., and they will still provide some abortion counseling, which is only 3% of their business nationwide, not even in every market. And so it's just a political ploy on the part of the Republicans to use that as a and it doesn't. All it does is does a disservice to women's health. And I think again we need to look at the big picture. What are the things that we need to do to keep it still legal? I want to keep it legal, but let's do all the other things that make it so that a woman doesn't have to make those choices.
Definitely. It's the idea of safe. It's legal, safe, and rare. So we have,
that was Bill Clinton's statement, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And then one of the other things I wanted to mention, just a local thing. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. On 96, there's a guy with a bunch of trailers. Any local people possibly will recognize it. He has these big red handwritten things about the Planned Parenthood selling body parts. We've been talking about this and how the people who basically falsify these videos, they have been found to be liars. They have been shown. But this is something that is still pushed and pushed. I was going to say, do you think that guy has the right to have this crazy sign on his property? It's a little bit of a stretch.
Somebody took him to court, and he won his free right speech to have those up. I guess you could have the right to say as many unfactual things as possible. I mean, in my discussions over the past 7 years, I have come to understand that many people on the far right don't even understand what the word socialism is. They don't understand that videos are doctored and false, and so they continue to believe them. I mean, and the apotheosis of this, the epic peak of this, is the Trump campaign, which clearly continues to repeat things that are false, but they just keep repeating them anyways, and their followers seem to just take it as a fact. So I don't know what else to do about that, but just keep repeating actual facts.
And I think that's all we can do, to be honest with you. I mean, if you look at our show, I mean, we do that. Our goal is to go after stupidity, I guess is the nicest way to put it, and liars. Because what I find, and I don't want to generalize the Republican Party because I don't think that's relevant, but I think that the problem we're seeing is people are so desperate to not move to that side of the fear that people can't even move into the center.
Right.
And I'm hoping that Trump's going to push a lot of these Republicans to the center a little bit more, which will then in turn push some of those Democrats more progressive in the next 20 years. We're going to actually see a lot more progressive candidates. And yeah, it would be nice for a third party, yes. But moving at least the Democratic Party more progressive, the way Bernie was doing, is where I'm anti-war. I would like to get out of the war business 100%. But we just can't do that right now.
Yeah, actually, I don't know if you saw that from some of my bio stuff online, but in 1986, I was at Officers Candidate School for the Marine Corps.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not pro-war. I don't think anybody's pro-war. I don't think anybody's anti-war. There are some wars that are necessary. World War II was obviously necessary. We had no choice in Korea. We bungled Vietnam. Iraq was a big mistake. But I still think Afghanistan was the right conflict. I know a lot of people on the left disagree with me on that, but my view on that is that when the towers came down and they realized who facilitated that attack, the Taliban and Al-Qaeda were completely in bed with each other, using Afghanistan as a haven. Unfortunately, created by the Mujahideen by the Reagan administration. Right? It's one of those.
Yeah.
It's one of those. That's why we have to be so careful in Syria. We had to be so careful in Libya. But what are we going to do? We're going to arm people that's going to blow back on us later. That's exactly what happened when Reagan decided to be Mr. Anti-Communist and arm a bunch of radicals, which they didn't realize at the time apparently. So they pushed the Soviets out. Now these guys got a bunch of free time to go. Who can we go after now? And it's. Again, I'm a big history fan. You have to look at this in the sweep of history and not look at it in cyclical terms of what's going on in the last 2 years or 3 years. And this whole thing with radical Islam that started with the Wahhabi religion out of Saudi Arabia, to me, that's the root of it all. And I firmly believe, and I obviously don't have intelligence to back it up from Congress or the CIA. But there's probably people in Saudi Arabia still backing these radical groups around the country because it fits with the Wahhabi religion. And I can't say it any plainer than that. I mean, we ostensibly have them as an ally, but they're one of those ambiguous allies, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, we have taken quite a bit of your time up today, sir. So what we always do when we end an interview segment is we ask you to plug anything you want to plug and tell everybody where they can find you. So if you're a Twitter person, a Facebook person, an email person, tell everybody how to get a hold of you and then leave everybody with a message.
Well, the easiest thing to do is first go to our campaign website, DennisMurphyForCongress.com. Just all run together, DennisMurphyForCongress.com. The links are there to our Facebook page, to our Twitter link, and our campaign financing. All that is on that one site. Which any help, or of course we're a grassroots campaign, so any help is greatly appreciated. But yeah, my goal is going to, and you'll look at it if you go there. My goal is to bring fact-based reasoning to the job, and I'm willing to work across the aisle. If a Republican or a Libertarian or a Green Party person in Congress has a good idea, and I look at the facts and it says, yes, this is going to work, I will work with them and I will help co-sponsor that bill if I get elected. But if they're just going to do grandstanding bills that are not based in fact, then they can expect no support from me. So,
well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We had a great time having a conversation. And the big thing on Cellar Door Skeptics that we always talk about is bringing the local candidates to you. So we've talked politics for the last 6 fucking months, Hannah. We have. Yeah. And now we finally got an actual politician. So thank you, Dennis, so much for joining us. Make sure
I'm an engineer. This is the first time.
You're an engineer. All right.
So if I get elected, call me a politician.
Well, awesome. Make sure everybody sticks around because when we come back with more Cellar Door Skeptics, we're going to be talking about Cain and his wife. We'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics.
Hey guys, this is Wyatt Mathers from the Atheist Avengers podcast. You are listening to the Cellar Door Skeptics. Prepare for the revolution.
Hi, this is Dan, Brian, and Matt with the Godless Revolution podcast. We've had a lot of great guests on this show, such as Russell Glasser, Dan Arrow, Brian Fields, David Silverman, Doug Mesner, a.k.a. Lucian Greaves, and Joey Kirkman, whom we love a lot.
We've also had a lot of really cool local guests. And we're a podcast that likes to fight for the separation of church and state and against anti-skepticism of all kinds.
You should give us a listen, because if you don't, you're going to be really sad.
Make your ears happy. Listen to the Godless Revolution podcast.
If you guys like what you're hearing on Cellar Door Skeptics, please consider sponsoring us on our Patreon page. Our goal at Cellar Door Skeptics is to help promote more science, skepticism, secularism, and humanism in the world. We want to create better content for our podcast and for you, the listener, all while trying to help promote local activism. We're going to strive to make better podcasts, and I'll tell you what, we're even going to contribute some of the proceeds to charity. So please join us over at Patreon.com/Cellar Door Skeptics to make sure that you sponsor us for as little as $1 an episode. Thank you guys so much, and prepare for the revolution.
This is Deborah McTaggart from Beyond the Trailer Park, and you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
Now, back to the show.
Now Cain said to Abel, "Let's go out to the field." While they were in the field, he attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield as crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord said to him, "Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain made love to his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Cain was then building a city, and he named it after his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad was the father of Mahujalel, and Mahujalel was the father of Methuselah, and Methuselah was the father of Lamech. And Lamech said to his wives, plural, wives. and I think we could stop here, because this almost feels like, Hannah, and I think I'm going to play something for you. This almost feels like...
Start the proceedings. It's time for
Crazy Shit Chris Used to Believe.
Brought to you by Cellar Door Skeptics.
I mean, seriously, Hannah. Seriously. There isn't anything more crazy. Maybe there is. But that's the Bible, right? Right.
It brings all of the weird, the boring, and the ridiculous all together. Okay, I don't care name after name after name. That's one of the things about the Bible that really gets dry, is when they start doing the full on father of son, the son to father and father, and then just throw the names at you. It's like, I get it. You know, they were prosperous in their reproductive notions, but I mean, the big question, who the hell if Eden was the origin of everything, who the heck did he marry? And I mean, they skip the entire courting process. They just go straight to sex, like immediate, like just right into the hardcore. So I just, whenever I hear the story, like this one here, I've never really thought too much about it. Like I always think about it, like Adam knew Eve and stuff, but like Cain, I knew Cain killed his brother, but I didn't know he was hooking up with like crazy otherworldly women. So what the heck are we gonna do with this?
Well, it depends, Hannah, because there's a lot of explanations, right? So there's tons and tons and tons of explanations.
And there has to be. It's the Bible. There's no one answer to that big sloppy mess sometimes.
Yeah, and there is, based on, to a point, you know, what, I don't know how to put it, but basically there's the hermeneutics, there's the young creationists, there is the IRC. I think they're young creationists too. But the ridiculous thing here is that in that passage, it literally just jumps. God casts him out. Now, all of a sudden, Cain has a wife.
And he's building a city, like, from 0 to 60.
Yeah. I mean, in how many years is that, right?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, within a lifetime, I would assume. I mean, they do have a tendency to skip, and linear time is not something incredibly important to a lot of holy text.
Now, one of the things that we should point out is there's a footnote for this, and the word Nod actually means wandering. So if we didn't take it literal, like Nod was a city, it's just the land of wandering.
So the land outside of Eden from the east. So anything east of Eden, wasn't that a TV show or something? East of Eden?
East of Eden, I think it is.
Yeah. Well, like like the land of Nod. So basically east. Anything east is where Cain was the king of the city. Like, and that's a pretty big chunk.
Yeah. And so it all depends on whose line you take.
So we're looking at Saudi Arabia, I guess.
Well,
like the whole.
Let's start with Ken Ham. How about that? Want to start with Ken Ham? This is what Ken Ham has to say about it. He says, first of all, it is vitally important for Christians to be able to answer this question. And he goes on to say that defending the fact that all humans are descendants of Adam and Eve, and secondly, it is only their descendants that can be saved. Now, I don't know why he makes a distinction, honestly, but he does. So he makes a distinction, and you would kind of think that maybe that's not worthwhile, right? But he makes it. He goes on to say, some people, though, say that there must have been other people other than Adam and Eve because Cain went to the land of Nod, found his wife. First of all, the scriptures quoted above, which he actually does not in his article, but the scriptures above make it obvious that there is only one man and one woman from whom everyone came. But then he says human beings, right? So he's making evolutionary distinctions to a point.
He has to.
But he doesn't believe in evolution. You know that. You and I both know that. So he goes on to say, secondly, the scripture says that Cain went to the land of Nod and knew, and then he puts in parentheses, had sexual relations with his wife.
What is he, a Bill Clinton?
Yeah. Yes. Ken goes on to say, John Calvin, in his commentary on Genesis, and most other conservatives make the point that Cain was married before he went to the land of Nod. Since men and women live hundreds of years, populations grew rapidly, and Cain had plenty of time to marry a sister or a niece, move to Nod, and build a city for his own descendants.
So wait, that's basically an apologetic acceptance of incest.
Yes, in apologetics, incest is okay until Leviticus. It's Leviticus that starts to outlaw incest.
Well, I mean, if you accept that Adam and Eve were the origin, then you have to, just for the first few layers of humans, have to be, brother and sister, cousins. Like, there's no way to spread out the family tree. So, but I mean, I guess they're just ignoring the fact that all the kind of genetic hoopla that comes from all that in family breeding would cause. So, we're assuming that he was able to marry someone inside, the family bounds or whatever, because He's a son of the first two humans. So like the first two humans, male and female, had two sons. One son killed the other son, and so they didn't have any other. Do not count the wives? Do not count the women, the sisters, or anything?
I don't know. The Bible literally doesn't say.
I know.
And that's the thing, and that's Ken Ham's point is like, well, we don't have the answer, therefore we have to make assumptions. We have to presuppose.
But it's literal. The literal word is that, wait, all the holes are missing, so you're filling them in. So which is the real one?
Yeah. And see, and that's the big thing, right? So there's another article called "Got Questions," and they ask the same thing: who was Cain's wife? Who was Cain? Was his wife his sister? Right? And so they go in and they talk about, since Adam and Eve were the first children, there's no other choices, just no other choices. And this is where it says in Leviticus 18 that basically God outlaws incest because they've multiplied too many times at that point, right? They've gone out of their way and multiplied too much.
Too many X-Files brothers and sisters with just like craziness and extra arms and legs. Like that's what science would say anyways.
Yeah, well, maybe. But we got to remember the genetics were pure back then, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I found another article on Pathos. It's about a couple years old. It's by Richard Osterling, and he gives a whole bunch of different answers. And I'll be honest, I did not research whether he is religious or atheist. I did not do that.
Well, let's just not assume a bias in. Let's say he's just giving, a multiple quotation, because his banner on top has that like coexist thing with all the different denominations. Is there an atheist denomination symbol?
No,
I don't see one.
So he's got all
the
Satan stars. So
yeah, he's got all the faiths up there, but he doesn't have like this nope.
Well, symbol. If we had to have a symbol, would it be like eating a baby with like forks in it?
I'm partial to the A with like the loopy thing that's inside the head.
So you don't like the baby eating thing?
You know what? Well, it might be too complicated for a symbol. Like you can't get a tattoo of like the human eating baby thing. It's a lot of work. Like we can get the Chinese symbol and assume that it means like faith and happiness, but it probably means like stupid American. But so this guy's got a couple of answers, and
yeah, and so this is why I thought it would be interesting, because, the wife and I were talking, and when we introed this segment, we just went right into it, right? So there's a reason why I wanted to do this, is because my wife kind of grew up like you. She didn't have a lot of religion. She did go to church more than you did, but she didn't have a lot of religion in her upbringing. So for her, it was completely different in, what she believed or understood or dealt with. And that was the biggest thing for her, was where would Cain get his wife from? Why would he not have some sort of a wife? Why would he?
Where did he find her?
How did he find her? And so one of the interesting things in this, and so I told her, I said, well, there's several different theories, but I'm not super up on them. And so one of the ancient traditions is that Cain married one of Adam and Eve's daughters. So that's kind of what this article starts out with. And he says they are mentioned in chapter 5 in the Jubilees, which is one of Josephus's book, and then also the Talmud. So they say in present narrative context, no other possibilities exist. And so that's the big thing here. Again, that complements what Ken Ham says.
Basically, the sisters were just unannounced in the Bible. Women didn't get any kind of mention.
Well, not that they didn't. Yes. Yes, they didn't get any mention, but also the fact that they had, there was nobody else for them to marry. So that's the whole point, is that there's nothing for them to do. Therefore, it has to be one of them. It has to be, because there's no other possibilities. So without God, without
like an origin, two people for the beginning. Like assuming anybody else existed, then this is really easily explained. They just married outside the family for some other people in a different culture. But assuming, the Genesis story, the two origin God created, and those are the only people that could be saved, then those two people had to have created other people that weren't mentioned. So we're adding fluff and meat to the story that wasn't actually written in the Bible, which would have easily been written. I mean, just a couple of lines saying like, "Oh, the sisters were awesome." They didn't do that. They didn't have time to do that.
So here's an interesting point that I wanted to bring up. Right, this interesting point is that in this article, this guy starts going into, well, look at what verse 14 says. It says, whoever finds me will slay me. Think about that. Who's going to slay him? His brothers and sisters, his nieces and nephews?
Or mom and dad. Mom is pissed, and she's got a hammer. She's going to take care of business.
But no, hold on. It's when he wanders.
Oh.
So when he leaves.
So he's already killed his brother. Someone else can kill him.
Yes.
He's the only other person that's ever been given birth.
Yes, and that's why he gets a birthmark, Hannah. That's why they give him, well, it's not a birthmark, but they give him, a
mark of Cain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
they blame
black
people for all kinds of stuff. The mark of Cain and Ham. They just say, "Oh yeah, that's the mark. Your skin tone."
Yeah, you're mixing Mormonism up with this anyway. But yeah, so it's exactly right. So who would he be afraid of? And so that's what this article talks about. If you look at the logistics, yeah. So there is nobody else. He would have to marry his sister. But who's going to kill him? Who's going to go out when he wanders away? Has his brothers and sisters left? Are they technically all still family? So even if he wanders away and they're all still family, it doesn't make any sense because other people would want to kill him, but they don't exist, but they do.
Yeah, you would have to stretch like a few generations out for the family to be spread out far enough for parts of the family to want to kill other parts of the family. Otherwise, there'd be, immediate family members. Well, first off, we got the first brothers, then one of them killed. So, we immediately are not really giving humanity a whole lot of morality here. But.
Yeah. Well, and so that's the thing. So this it goes on to say that there's somebody in Bethel Seminary, and he presupposes the numbers of people, right? And he says it would place a severe strain on the passage to insist that all of them were additional children of Adam and Eve. So this is what he did. He posed a possible explanation, basically explaining other hominids, Cro-Magnon, the Neanderthal, maybe earlier ones, and that who existed prior to the time of Adam, but had only animal intelligence and are not bound to God in a covenant relationship.
Well, there's the big problem right there. I mean, any biologist, any person that is a specialist in evolution will tell you there was no first, Homo sapien versus Homo erectus. Like, there was no Homo erectus mother who gave birth to the first Homo sapien. That line doesn't exist. It was such a slow process. There wasn't a previous generation that gave birth to the first next generation. It was all blended evenly. Like, they may be apologetically assuming all of the existence of the previous, hominid species, but they're basically making the assumption that you could have the first one of any one of those things, and you really can't do that because it's such a long term. So,
maybe hold on, we can look at it because they go on to talk about how basically these near human predecessors would be the first true man, right? So if they evolved, and let's say you gain 0.2% intelligence every time they reproduce, so they kept reproducing until they hit a bare minimum.
Well, yeah, but it's still the process is so slow that there isn't a completely Homo erectus that gives birth to a completely Homo sapien. Like, there's a blend, just a bunch of Homo sapien and Homo erectus parts existed. But when you look at it in long term, you see these two species as differential. But when it comes to the science, you could look through the Richard Dawkins book, Selfish Gene, and it gives a thorough explanation of how you can't tell the specific speciation when you look at it directly, but you can see the two species over a long time. But this basically explanation, they're trying to assume it's to appropriate evolutionary story, evolutionary theology, whatever they would the weird blending that they're trying to doing. But it's I guess it's an interesting perspective for what religion is willing to do to try to explain the holes that it has.
Yeah. And and that's what was funny is my wife goes, "What do you fuck a monkey?" And I was like, no, not like that. No. And she goes, "I know, I'm just kidding." It's just she was using humor to deploy the situation because that's how ridiculous this even sounds. So let's get rid of the first man type thing and just move on to, we have intelligent species. They still had Neanderthals around at the same time that, we existed.
So God flicked on humans and left all the other parts.
Well, he could have. Let's just pretend that. So we can presuppose that for a second. So basically what that would say is that Cain went and found Neanderthals
Oh,
and because technically they were not bound to God because they were not, us.
Yeah.
Homo sapiens, then what that does say is that maybe that allows for Cain to have offspring with another person who isn't that, and therefore is breathing life into the Neanderthals. So if you look at all the hominids that were left at the time that hadn't died out, Neanderthal existence in some of us, and through reproduction, we've weeded some of those genes out, but we still have the bare minimum of some of those genes. So true logic could almost say that if this is correct, it would somewhat make sense if we went hyperbole aspect into Genesis, and just a lot of that was just guided stories that allowed for evolution to all of a sudden make humankind intelligible. But then that also begs another question, right? So what about all the Neanderthals that died? Do they burn in hell, or do they just go into non-existence? And if they just go into non-existence, then what's the difference between us and them? It's just consciousness. It's just a cognitive understanding. That's the only difference. And that's the real sad thing. That's, in my opinion, that's where it blows the hole, is right there. Inside of the fact that there is still millions of other species that died and go nowhere. But yet God decided he's going to burden us and saddle us with a burden that almost seems illogical.
So basically you're saying that like there were, multiple different species of hominid still kind of floundering, in the Homo sapien, clicked on magically by God, was the one that was successful through his, support or whatever.
Yes.
So as far as I know, like the gradient was pretty even. So like, I don't know how far the time period between Homo sapien, Neanderthal, and Homo erectus and the different levels that you have. But as far as I know, interbreeding was recently one of the questions they were talking about, and they're seeing through the few places they've actually been able to test genetics that some interbreeding was popular or was possible between the Neanderthal and Homo erectus and stuff. So like that's the thing here we're talking about. We're basically interbreeding. So when you separate species is when they can no longer breed. And so long time again, talking that they whether or not humans were specifically differentiated from Homo sapiens, Homo erectus, and Neanderthal, like that. There's kind of a blending there because of a long time. This is a really nice, and we've always kind of said this when it comes to religious stuff. I always imagine like, okay, we know that there were these other things, these other stories, and there's all this stuff that existed before us. How can we try to explain it? We use creativity. We'll use the stuff that we know and make this story. Well, that's kind of how this is. Like they're kind of appropriating maybe some old folk tales about all these other different things. And that's kind of what we're getting. We're getting this story that appropriates history in the best way a very, very simple intellectual mind could at the time. I mean, like 8,000 years ago is when they believe that some of these, the original Torah and the can't think of the other name for the old Jewish books, but the Talmud. So like, I mean, these are really old attempts at explaining, I guess some kind of historical perspective, and there could be other humans, but only these ones were important. I can see that as kind of a place where they would take this, and obviously this is like a folk tale. This big piece is missing,
and I would agree, but it almost just seems like a folk tale. Like I'm sorry, like it just does.
Well, when you ask these questions, it's really you need all kinds of extra explanations. Like it would be really easy if this book would have been like, yep, and so all the brothers and sisters, they all reproduced and had the next generation, and then exponential growth blew it out and whatever. But they don't give that, and they leave that hole there, and we have to fill it with something.
Yeah, and you would think, Hannah, that we wouldn't have to fill that hole.
if it was the total, the explanation from God, it should be pretty straightforward, right?
You'd think. And my big thing is instead of Frank Turk fucking making something called I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, he should explain this shit and say, hey, look, here is where we can benefit. Let's explain this away. Let's make this better. And what'll happen is we'll be able to lead more and more generations to the Lord, but instead they're going to attack the atheists because that's all they have left. And that's my end of my rant for this segment. We'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics and TPP.
I'm Amanda Wright, and we're promoting secular feminism.
And you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics. What's something I could do with a very sexy lady friend of mine that people would find provocative, interesting, and entertaining enough to tune in week after week? Oh, I know. A podcast. If you'd like to hear me and Kate be provocative and thought-provoking week after week, join us on the Unbuckling the Bible Belt podcast. We'd love for you to be part of our audiological three-way.
Looking for something new and exciting, or maybe just a change from the old atheist show format? Cellar Door Skeptics podcast provides listeners with hours of enjoyment each week on Spreaker and iTunes. Check us out as we talk politics, religion, science, reviews of books and music, along with the occasional interview just for a twist. Join Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern as they bring fresh content to you. Walk with us through the cellar door as we help you prepare for the revolution. You can find us on Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, and even on Facebook.
Hey, this is Keith.
And this is Jen, and we're from Not Another Atheist Podcast.
You're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
Join the revolution.
Now, back to the show.
and we're back, Chris. We're back, and we're bad, and we're ready for action. Thank you so much, everyone, for sticking around through the most amazing segments that we've done so far. We interviewed Dennis Murphy. We talked about Cain and Abel, and now we're here to talk about the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And we're going to have that conversation, and I don't know a lot about it. I know a lot of people are anti it, but I genuinely don't know a ton about it here.
Okay, so for anybody who doesn't know what the TPP is, like what it is it's a pact. It's a treaty that it's grouping 12 different countries together: U.S., Japan, Malaysia, Vietnam, Singapore, Brunei, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Mexico, Chile, and Peru. And it doesn't seem like that's that many countries because there's a ton of them. I can't remember the last pact. I'm pretty sure it's over 140 or so. But this pact specifically, those countries are pretty spread out all over the world. And we're jumping the Pacific, right? So like the pact aims to deepen economic ties between these nations. The slashing the tariffs and fostering trade to boost growth. So the idea is to make money and things go faster in and out between this grouping. So like the whole, the North American Free Trade Agreement was supposed to make things really easy for money to go in and out Canada and Mexico. I mean, that's the whole idea, North American free trade. And so member countries are also hoping for this to foster a closer relationship on economic policies and regulation. The agreement would basically create a new single market like what the EU has. And that's the idea, to try to bring in some of these other countries that are, I mean, you don't think of Singapore being this really strong.
Hold on, though. Why wouldn't we just do the EU market? Why are we doing a new thing? If you say, hey, they're just trying to create a single market, the EU already has that set up. Why is everybody trying to go against the EU?
Well, we don't really know how well the EU is going to survive this Brexit thing. Like,
okay, but hold on.
Britain was a major
has been
piece
around
of it.
Before this, dude.
Oh, I know. Like, so what they're doing is, this is not.
But that's my hold on. We can't talk about it until we address that point. That's and again, for the folks listening, I'm very new to this TPP thing. This is not something I did a lot of research on, beforehand. But my thing is why right here do we want to go around the EU? The EU has a world market. And think about what we talked about with Turkey 2 weeks ago, is that if they started implementing different things, right, they would get kicked out of the EU and they wouldn't be eligible to be part of it because of their death penalty and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So again, why are we trying to circumvent the EU with the TPP?
Well, probably because all of these countries are not part of the EU and they want to be, kind of a rival to it. I mean, if you think about the movie and the book in 1984, we have Oceania and, the other, there's three, I can't remember the other two, but it's just like, Oceania has always been at war with the other ones or whatever. Like this is, this globalization, I would call it there's no question for the future full on, globalization, communication, everything being formed into one big group. And so like these groups, all these economies are trying to form something more powerful than they are by themselves. So they can compete with the EU. Because that single market is a really, really great idea. It makes everything really, really easy for Europeans. So like Japan, Malaysia, Japan's got a really stagnating economy right now. But like Malaysia, Vietnam, Singapore, those are economies that you don't really see jumping into, the major markets very often. So this would be a benefit for them.
Okay, so it's a benefit for them, right? We get that. But it's going around the EU. So to me, that's almost more problematic than anything else, because I get, in capitalism, you don't want one world market. I get that. But at the same token, we when we look at things, we want to go, okay, hold on. So there's one world market. We're going to fight against it with the TPP to a point where we're almost saying the EU is worthless. We don't agree with it. Therefore, we're going to establish our own American EU with TPP.
Well, there's NATO, the North American Trade Organization, and then there's also NAFTA. Both of those things were created, like the European Union was created, as far as I know, in the 70s, late 70s, beginning of the 80s. It's been around for a while, and the euro is relatively new, that idea of a single currency, but the European Union itself has been around for a while. And so the North American Free Trade Agreement, the NATO, the North American Trade Organization or trade, that idea, that's always kind of been in competition with the European single market, that the idea of an organized and unified Europe. And so, I mean, we've seen these kinds of ideas of like collaboration and speed. And one of the things like Bernie Sanders and a lot of the liberal media and a lot of the more liberal politicians have said that we've seen this consistently undermine manufacturing. We've seen this globalization is not so much a benefit for the little guy. Making me as a manufacturer compete with machinists in China where they get paid pennies on the day. It makes my life more difficult. And that's the idea. That's one of the initial areas where people don't like the idea of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The whole political ideal that we can have these companies or these countries all working together on paper sounds really great, but when it comes to the details is when it starts getting a little bit fishy, whether or not this can be something that can benefit everybody in these countries, or if it's just benefiting a few people who have the keys to the safe at the top of the special list or whatever, like the United States 0.1%.
Yeah. So the one article you linked is called The American Thinker, right? And the American Thinker talks about how they are comparing it to Obamacare. And so to me, that's a red flag for me, because I like Obamacare. I don't think it's the best thing in the world, but I do enjoy what Obamacare has done. But so this is talking about Obamacare in the TPP is there's an issue. It's negotiated in secret.
Yeah.
And then they talk about how our government is replacing, a different version of healthcare, and they're going to keep it away from the American eyes. I don't know if I agree with that, but I do agree that, the TPP so far almost sounds a lot like we are trying to go against the world. We are trying to go against the other educated nations. We are trying to take this and make this, our own thing and say, well, we don't like this. We want these other things. And why would we want that?
We want easy access. So like what this is doing is it's basically opening markets that we don't really have good access to. So the TPP itself
So it's going to enhance capitalism.
Yeah, it's reducing trade barriers that these other countries that we mentioned earlier. They have trade barriers against us in certain areas, certain places, different things for imports and exports. They have a trade barrier against the United States. And what this is doing, these countries are agreeing to remove some of those trade barriers to allow American products in, assuming that, all of our inflow and everything is going to make it, this easy, fast back and forth is going to be a net benefit to them. The United States itself is not really removing much of its tariff. This is some of the stuff that we got, that I listened to the other day from some of the experts that were on NPR on Point. It was a great show, and they had people talking both sides of it. And it was a surprise for me that some of the benefits that some people are going to be getting from the TPP. But I do think that the net detriments that the TPP would bring, like I mentioned a minute ago, from the basically competing against other really, really, really poor human rights and labor standard countries versus the United States, it would take massive government subsidizing to make us competitive. So like if I had to manufacture something en masse, so like tons and tons of pieces, and another company in China was doing the exact same thing, I would need government money given to me to reduce my cost enough so that it was competitive with China. We see this type of stuff happening with a lot of our farming markets. So like we subsidize certain markets of corn and cotton or whatever. And then when we get into another market, like let's say what we did in Haiti, we dumped our government subsidized stuff in, and Haiti couldn't compete. They couldn't compete because they did everything without government subsidies. So their costs were really high. But in China and places like that, they have very low costs. And so we have to do the subsidy in order to be competitive there. And it makes us reduce our costs, or it would make our manufacturing process and our farming process more profitable if we reduce our wages. And so it makes it basically it's a net detriment for our workers, for the bare bones blue collar workers in the U.S. to compete against the really, really crazy low wages in China.
So why wouldn't okay, so the EU does this. Why wouldn't we do this as well? Why wouldn't we just say there's a base living wage that we agreed on upon in America? And what is our minimum wage? $8.25 or $8.50?
$7.25.
Really?
Yeah, it's still
my God. All right. Anyway, so why wouldn't we just say that has to be for anybody we interact with?
Well, that's the hope, is that something like the TPP would require these other countries to rise to the American standard.
It's just a simple question. Does it? Yes or no?
We have not seen. That's one of the things that you were talking about there, comparing it to Obamacare. I prefer the Affordable Care Act because that's the actual name. But either way, the conservatives love to go with the Obamacare name. But they're saying that it's 2,700 pages long. That's a massive book. Well, the TPP, as far as I know, is 6,000 pages. It's a huge, huge document, and it's filled with fluff. It's filled with stuff. And you need to be a financial expert. You need to be, an expert in those types of things to go through it and really find out what it means. And it was actually negotiated by major corporations in secret. The United States, the people, even the congressional people like Bernie Sanders and everyone was saying, we want to know what the hell is in the TPP. If you refuse to tell us what's in it, we won't support it. And they refused to tell it. And then Obama wanted to put it through fast track to pass it as quickly as possible, essentially bypassing any kind of critique. Well, it didn't go through 100%. Obama's still trying to get it passed, but this kind of short circuiting, shoot it by the system. That's what they're saying it's like when it comes to trying to slip something under the mat. And 6,000 page document, there's probably a bunch of hoopla in there. So
why doesn't somebody just sit them down and go, okay, hey, let's have this conversation, right? Let's talk about it.
Since we've known for a while now, they have been doing that.
Like I said, why wouldn't somebody just do that? It seems more logical to me to just all of a sudden say, hey, okay, does the TPP say this? It's simple. Does it say it? Oh, it doesn't? Okay, let's move on. If it does say it, then we need to address it.
That's the legalese issue. There's a lot of these type of things, like when people talk about the Constitution, the right to bear arms, or whatever, these are like, they assume it comes down to interpretation. It's like reading a holy text. Like these types of things, there is no single one answer. Like legalese is like that. The TPP is full of that kind of stuff. And so we're hoping that everybody ethically would try to raise everybody's, wages and stuff like that. But we're not really seeing a lot of evidence of that. The U.S. isn't being forced to reduce its tariffs on a lot of stuff. So that's a benefit to the United States. We're getting access, putting our product into other countries. That's a benefit for the U.S. But I have not heard, and I have not seen an argument that says that the U.S. manufacturing base, whatever, is not going to have to really, really deep deal with, being competitive with these massively low wage industries like Singapore. If you think of Singapore, you don't think of high wages for the hard workers. That's not something that you expect. And so we're trying to fast track this stuff through. We're trying to push it through. And I don't think enough American people really know what it is. So what we're doing is we're going by like the Bernie Sanders model. We're going by the progressive model that says, no, this is a terrible idea. And then you hear the conservative model, which used to be, this is an awesome thing, go capitalism, more globalization for everything. But one of the things that's been interesting is the TPP has kind of sort of been evolving over recent. The biggest argument that I heard a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters saying, and himself, was saying that let's assume GE is an American company and they want to go into another market. And if the TPP basically says that if the new market, so let's say Australia, is blocking their ability to make a profit, so being unreasonable and making barriers that are not normal, and that GE is being hurt because it's not an Australian company or whatever, that GE would be allowed to sue the country of Australia, and there would be this supranational tribunal that would see whether or not, kind of like a world court, like the UN World Court or whatever, that would say, okay, is this, is Australia being fair? And we found Mitch McConnell, the big tobacco guy, Republican. He was initially super supportive. Yeah, the turtle. He was super supportive of the TPP. And big tobacco didn't quite get as much power as they wanted, because going back to Australia, you can't just have your logo and your company name on a pack of cigarettes. They put, pictures of lung cancer and, dead bloody lungs and stuff on their cigarette packages. And the tobacco industry obviously doesn't want that, but they haven't been able to officially put together like an argument saying, okay, we can sue Australia for blocking us, that we deserve, the rights to this market. And so they're not as strong as they were expecting. The same with the pharmaceutical industry.
So wait a minute, hold on. That almost sounds like they want to circumvent a lower court's rights. It almost sounds like if it would be like in America, we have the states and the local elections, and they make these different bills, and they try to circumvent the federal government. Yeah. And it's almost like the reverse. It would be like us coming in and saying, hold on a second. You just had baby dead fetuses and dead cancer lungs on your packs? No. That's going to be a small icon. We want the rest of it to be Marlboro. This is where you learn to live.
Yeah, it would be like if you imagine the Supreme Court being made up of multinational entities. So like GE and Halliburton and, Mobile One or Mobile or whatever, and Exxon Mobil, any like major worldwide corporations, they are essentially going to be part of this world tribunal. And there's going to be an elevated above, the nationalistic supremacy that we have. We see like a nation being completely sovereign. Like that's the lid. That's the ceiling of, world autonomy. Well, the argument is that the TPP would allow global multinational corporations to somehow exceed that nationalistic level, and they would essentially become supranational corporations, and they have more power because they could sue, and if they were found, then they would be given the rights to that market unfettered as they would wish. Well, things have changed a little bit, and that ruling has been kind of narrowed down, like I said, with the pharmaceutical and tobacco industries not getting exactly what they wanted, not being able to jump in free reign like they expected. So this small change to that kind of part of the TPP has been seen as a little bit beneficial, but I still don't think it outweighs any of the natural negative detriments of making us compete with, like I said, slave wages.
Yeah. And that's crazy. One of the arguments, and you had a bunch of articles that you posted, and we'll post links to them. From the Washington Post, they talk a little bit about, will it lead to more companies challenging environmental regulations?
Yeah, superseding completely what was it, the Greenpeace, or no, the European green power groupings.
And this almost sounds like this is an argument for libertarianism. TPP, I think NAFTA was a horrible decision to make. We should never have done NAFTA. I also think that this TPP almost sounds like it's a horrible discussion point too. We shouldn't allow the world to dictate that. We should be going above and beyond to set the standards to say, no, you will pay this much. We should stop bringing products in from these countries that are paying their people shit wages.
Or, like I said, like tariffs and stuff that charge more.
Yeah. Disgusting. It's just a disgusting way. But that's all for us today. Hannah and I, we've talked with congressmen's. We've talked about Cain and Abel and his wife. Maybe they're the same wife. I don't know. We've also talked about the TPP and our opposition to it. And I learned something today, Hannah. I did. That I don't like the TPP. Anyway, make sure you stick around and come back for next week for another amazing episode of Cellar Door Skeptics. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Spreaker. Have a good night, everyone.
You've been listening to a presentation of Cellar Door Skeptics. Check us out on Spreaker, cellardoorskeptics.com.